I, 28, female, always believed that marriage was a partnership. My husband, Mark, 30, male, seemed to believe it too, at least in the beginning. We built our life on what I thought were shared dreams and mutual respect. The biggest dream of all was starting our family. When I found out I was pregnant, it felt like the final perfect piece of our life was falling into place. We were happy, or so I thought. The cracks started to show around the time of the baby shower. They were small at first, almost invisible, but they grew spiderwebbing through the foundation of everything I held dear until the whole structure came crashing down around me. It all started with a gift, a ridiculously expensive stroller system that my mother-in-law, Brenda, insisted on buying for us. She made a huge show of it, presenting it in the middle of the living room, surrounded by all our friends and family. Everyone clapped and told me how lucky I was to have such a generous mother-in-law. I smiled and thanked her, but a cold feeling settled in my stomach. I knew we couldn't afford it. I knew our budget was tight, especially with the baby coming. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I brought it up with Mark. I tried to be gentle. I sat beside him on the sofa, surrounded by piles of pastel-colored gifts. The scent of baby powder and new clothes filled the air. Mark, that stroller is beautiful, I began, but it's so expensive. Are you sure we can handle that right now? He waved a dismissive hand, not looking up from his phone. Brenda wanted to get it. Let her. It's a gift. I pressed a little more. I know, but she often expects to be paid back for her gifts. We still owe her for the down payment on the car, remember? He finally looked at me, his expression hardening. Don't worry about it, Clara. I handled it. His tone was sharp, a clear signal to drop the subject. I let it go, but the uneasy feeling remained. Handling it meant using our savings, the savings we had carefully built for the baby's arrival, for emergencies, for our future. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself to trust my husband. It was a mistake that would cost me more than I could ever imagine. The next few days were a blur of organizing gifts and preparing the nursery. I tried to push my worries aside, focusing on the joy of our coming child, but the thought of our finances kept nagging at me. A week after the baby shower, I decided to check our joint savings account online just to reassure myself. I logged in, my heart pounding a little faster than usual. I told myself everything would be fine. Mark was responsible. He wouldn't do anything to jeopardize our family's security. The page loaded. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The balance was nearly zero. I blinked, thinking it was a mistake, a glitch in the system. I refreshed the page. The number remained the same. A huge withdrawal had been made 2 days after the baby shower. The exact amount was staggering. It was not just our shared savings. It was the inheritance my grandmother had left me. All of it. Gone. My grandmother had passed away a year ago, leaving me a substantial amount of money. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to secure our child's future. To provide a cushion that would allow me to take a full year of maternity leave without financial stress. It was my safety net, a final gift from a woman I loved dearly. I had deposited it into our joint savings with the understanding that it was for the baby, for our long-term goals, a house deposit, or college funds. We had discussed it at length. Mark had agreed. He had promised. Now, seeing that empty account, his promises echoed in my mind, hollow and meaningless. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This could not be happening. There had to be an explanation. A terrible, horrible mistake. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed Mark's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful. "Hey, honey, everything okay?" His casual tone was like a slap in the face. "Mark, the money," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The money from my grandmother. It's gone." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of the typing in the background. What are you talking about, Clara? He asked, his voice still light, but with an underlying edge I had never heard before. I'm looking at our savings account right now, I said, my voice growing stronger with a surge of adrenaline. It's all gone, the entire inheritance. There was a huge withdrawal 3 days ago. The typing stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. I prayed he would say it was a mistake, that the bank had made an error, that he had moved it to a high-interest account without telling me. I would have been angry, but I could have forgiven that. I would have understood. What he said next, however, shattered any hope of a simple explanation. "Oh, that," he said, his voice now cold and distant. "I took care of it. I invested it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You invested it?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "You invested my entire inheritance without even talking to me? Mark, we agreed that money was for the baby. It was our security." He sighed, a long, weary sound, as if I were a child he had to be patient with. "Clara, it was for us. It's an investment that will pay off big time. You just need to trust me." Trust him? How could I trust him? He had gone behind my back and gambled with our future. "Trust you?" I choked out, tears welling in my eyes. "You drained our savings account. You took my grandmother's money. Where is it, Mark? What did you do with it?" He was silent for a moment, and I heard a woman's voice in the background. It was Brenda. She was murmuring something I couldn't quite hear. Then Mark came back on the line, his voice devoid of any warmth or affection. It was the voice of a stranger. "Listen, Clara," he said, his tone flat and final. "We are married. That money belongs to both of us. The money is mine now." The line went dead. I stood in the nursery, surrounded by the symbols of our future, a future that now felt like a lie. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. The words echoed in my head, over and over again. "The money is mine now, not ours. Mine." In that moment, I understood. This was not a partnership. This was not about our shared dreams. This was about him. It was about his wants, his needs, his control. The love I thought we had, the trust I had given him so freely, it all evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard knot of betrayal in the pit of my stomach. The baby kicked inside me, a gentle reminder of the life I was carrying, the life I now had to protect. My shock began to transform into something else, something sharper and more focused. It was anger, a deep, burning anger that cleared my head and strengthened my resolve. He thought he could take what was mine, what was meant for our child, and face no consequences. He was wrong. I picked up my phone, my hand steady this time. I was not going to cry. I was not going to break down. I was going to fight back. And I was going to win. My first call was not to a lawyer, but to my best friend, Sarah. I needed to hear a friendly voice, someone who would believe me without question. She answered immediately, her cheerful, "Hello!" a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. As soon as I started speaking, my voice cracked, and the tears I had been holding back finally came. I told her everything, the empty account, the conversation with Mark, his chilling final words. She listened patiently, without interrupting, letting me pour out all my fear and anger. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. "Clara," she said, her voice filled with a quiet fury that mirrored my own. "That is not just a betrayal. That is theft." Her validation was a balm to my raw nerves. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being hysterical. What Mark had done was wrong, plain and simple. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I'm still in shock. I can't believe he would do this." "You need to find out where the money went," she said, her tone practical and grounding. "He said he invested it. That could mean anything. You need proof, Clara. You need to know exactly what you're dealing with." She was right. I needed information. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions of my daily routine, but my mind was racing. When Mark came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of our financial statements in front of me. I had printed everything: the savings account history, our credit card bills, our joint checking account. I wanted to see if there were any other surprises. He walked in, whistling, and dropped his keys on the counter. He leaned down to kiss me, but I turned my head away. He straightened up, his smile fading as he saw the papers spread across the table. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice wary. "This is our life, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "Or what's left of it. I want to know where my grandmother's money is, and I want to know now." He sighed and pulled out a chair, sitting down opposite me. He tried to take my hand, but I pulled it back. "Clara, I told you. It's an investment. It's going to make us a lot of money." "What investment?" I demanded. "Where is the paperwork? Where are the receipts? An investment of that size would have a paper trail." "Show it to me." He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding my gaze. "It's complicated," he said finally. "It's a business opportunity. A friend of mine—" "What friend?" I interrupted. "What's his name?" He ran a hand through his hair, a sure sign that he was lying. "You don't know him. It's a private deal." The more he evaded, the more certain I became that something was terribly wrong. This was not a legitimate investment. This was something else entirely. "Mark," I said, my voice dangerously low, "you have until tomorrow morning to show me exactly where that money went. If you don't, I'm calling my family's lawyer, the one who handled my grandmother's estate." His head snapped up, his eyes widening in alarm. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his expression. "You wouldn't do that," he said. "Don't be dramatic, Clara. This is a family matter. We don't need to involve lawyers." "You made it a legal matter when you took my money without my permission," I replied, standing up. "Tomorrow morning, Mark. That's your deadline." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving him sitting there amidst the evidence of his betrayal. I went into the nursery and closed the door, leaning against it as I took a deep breath. The battle had just begun, but I had drawn the first line in the sand. I would not be a victim in my own life. I would not let him destroy the future I was building for my child. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. Mark was still asleep, his face peaceful, as if he didn't have a care in the world. For a moment, I saw the man I'd married, the man I'd loved. A wave of sadness washed over me. How had we come to this? But then I remembered his cold words on the phone, his evasiveness last night, and the sadness was replaced by a steely determination. I got up, dressed, and went to the kitchen. There was a single piece of paper on the table. It was a printout from a website, a generic-looking investment firm I had never heard of. There were no official documents, no account numbers, just a vague description of a high-yield real estate fund. It was clearly a fake, something he had thrown together in a panic. I crumpled it in my fist and threw it in the trash. He was not going to get away with this. He was treating me like an idiot. He thought a flimsy, fake document would be enough to placate me. He underestimated me. I made a cup of tea and sat down with my laptop. Sarah was right. I needed to find out where the money really went. I logged into our online banking again. The withdrawal was a single, large wire transfer. There was a reference number, but the recipient was listed only as a numbered company. It was a dead end. Or was it? I remembered something my grandmother had told me when she was setting up her will. She had a lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a kind, elderly man who had handled her family's affairs for decades. He was meticulous, she had said. He crossed every T and dotted every I. He would know what to do. I found his number in my grandmother's old address book, which I kept in a memory box. My hands were shaking as I dialed. I was nervous about bringing a stranger into our personal problems, but Mark had left me no choice. A calm, professional voice answered, "Thompson and Associates. How may I help you?" I took a deep breath. "My name is Clara," I said. "I'm the granddaughter of Eleanor Vance. Mr. Thompson handled her estate." The receptionist put me through immediately. Mr. Thompson's voice was exactly as I remembered from the will reading, calm and reassuring. Clara, my dear, it's good to hear from you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. How can I help? I explained the situation, my voice trembling at first, but growing stronger as I laid out the facts. The inheritance, the joint account, the sudden withdrawal, Mark's claims of an investment, and his final, chilling declaration. Mr. Thompson listened patiently, not saying a word until I had finished. When I was done, there was a long pause. I see, he said finally, his voice grave. Clara, the first thing you need to understand is that an inheritance, even if deposited into a joint account, can often be considered separate property, especially if its source is clearly documented. We have all that documentation from your grandmother's estate. A tiny spark of hope ignited within me. So, it wasn't his money to take? I asked. Legally, he had access to the account, Mr. Thompson explained, but he did not have the right to unilaterally move that entire sum without your consent, particularly if he has used it for his own purposes and not for the benefit of the marriage. What he has done is a serious breach of trust. It could even be considered misappropriation of funds, or worse. He told me the first step was to trace the money. He asked for the reference number of the wire transfer. I read it to him. Leave this with me, Clara, he said. I have resources. I will find out where that money went. In the meantime, I want you to do something for me. Do not confront your husband again. Do not let him know you have spoken to me. Act as normally as you can. We need him to feel secure. People who feel secure get careless. His words were a lifeline. For the first time in days, I felt like I was not alone. I had an ally, someone who knew the rules of this game Mark was playing. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. You are your grandmother's granddaughter, Clara, he said warmly. She was a strong woman. I see that same strength in you. We will get through this. After I hung up, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I had a plan. I had an expert on my side. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Mark thought he had all the power. He thought he could lie and bully his way through this. He was about to find out how wrong he was. The game had changed, and I was ready to play. Following Mr. Thompson's advice was one of the hardest things I had ever had to do. I had to pretend that everything was normal, that I had accepted Mark's flimsy explanation about the investment. When he came into the kitchen that morning looking nervous, I forced a smile. I looked at the website you printed out, I said, my voice carefully neutral. It looks interesting. I guess I was just worried. He visibly relaxed, a wave of relief washing over his face. See, I told you, he said, coming over to hug me. I've got it all under control. This is going to set us up for life. You, me, and the baby. I let him hold me, my body stiff and unresponsive. It felt like being embraced by a stranger. I had to fight the urge to push him away, to scream at him for the liar he was. But I remembered Mr. Thompson's words. Let him feel secure. So I played my part. I made him breakfast. I talked about the baby. I asked about his day. All the while, a storm of anger and betrayal raged inside me. Every word of affection from him felt like a lie. Every touch felt like a violation. It was a torturous performance, but I knew it was necessary. The days that followed were a strange kind of limbo. I was living a double life. On the surface, I was the happy, expectant mother, going about my routine, preparing for our child's arrival. But underneath, I was a detective, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to act. I started paying closer attention to Mark's habits, his phone calls, his comings and goings. He was careless, just as Mr. Thompson had predicted. He started leaving his laptop open, his phone unlocked. He thought he had won. He thought I was back, under his control. One evening, while he was in the shower, I took a quick look at his laptop. His email was open. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. He had forfeited his right to privacy when he stole from me. I quickly scrolled through his recent messages. Most of it was junk mail and work-related correspondence. But then I saw it. An email from a commercial real estate agent. The subject line was, "Finalized purchase agreement, 124 Main Street." My heart stopped. I clicked on it. The email contained an attached document. I opened it. It was a sales contract for a small storefront in the newly renovated downtown district. The purchase price was almost the exact amount of my inheritance. The buyer was listed as a company I didn't recognize, but the signatory on behalf of the company was Mark. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was it. This was his investment. He hadn't invested in a fund. He had bought a property. But why? And why the secrecy? I quickly forwarded the email to my own account and then deleted it from his sent folder and trash. I closed the laptop just as I heard the shower turn off. My mind was racing. 124 Main Street. What was so special about that address? The name of the company he used was Brenda's Best, which made a chill run down my spine. This was not just his plan. His mother was involved. The pieces started to click into place. Brenda had always been jealous of my financial independence. She had made snide comments about my inheritance, calling it unearned money. She had always wanted Mark to start his own business, a little boutique or a cafe, something she could brag about to her friends. She had been pushing him for years. Now, it seemed, they had found a way to fund her dream, using my money. The betrayal was deeper and darker than I had imagined. It was a conspiracy between the two people who were supposed to be my family. The next day, I drove downtown. I parked a block away from 124 Main Street and walked towards the address. It was a charming little brick building with a large display window. A "sold" sign was plastered across it. As I stood there, staring at the building that my grandmother's legacy had bought, a car pulled up to the curb. It was Brenda's car. She got out, followed by Mark. They were both smiling, laughing, looking up at the building with pride. Brenda unlocked the front door, and they went inside. I watched them through the glass, my heart turning to ice. They were pointing, gesturing, planning. This was their dream built on my stolen future. I saw Brenda hug Mark, her face glowing with triumph. In that moment, I hated them both with a ferocity that scared me. I took out my phone and took several pictures of them inside the store, of Brenda's car parked out front. More evidence. More proof. I drove home, my mind a cold, calm sea of rage. The performance was over. It was time to stop pretending. It was time to fight. I called Mr. Thompson as soon as I got in the door. "I know where the money went," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "He bought a building, and his mother is in on it." I told him everything I had found. He listened calmly. "Excellent work, Clara," he said when I had finished. "This is exactly what we needed. The company name, the purchase agreement, the photographs. You have built a very strong case." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," he said, his voice taking on a hard edge, "we let them get comfortable. Let them start their renovations. Let them invest more of their own time and money. And then, when they least expect it, we take it all back." The plan was cruel, but I didn't care. They deserved it. They had shown me no mercy. I would show them none in return. The next few weeks were an exercise in patience. I continued to play the role of the dutiful wife, all while gathering more information. I overheard phone calls between Mark and Brenda, discussing contractors and interior designers. I saw invoices for new flooring and light fixtures on the kitchen counter. They were pouring more money into the project, money I suspected Brenda was lending Mark, further entangling themselves in their web of deceit. They even had the audacity to discuss the grand opening with me, talking about it as our new business. "You'll be so proud, Clara," Mark said one evening, showing me a sketch of the proposed storefront, which would be an upscale baby boutique. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. They were going to sell overpriced baby clothes in a shop bought with money stolen from their own unborn child. I just smiled and nodded, the image of their downfall playing on a loop in my mind. During this time, I met with Mr. Thompson several times. We sat in his quiet, wood-paneled office, and he patiently explained the legal strategy. He had confirmed that the numbered company, Brenda's Best, was a shell corporation with Mark as the sole director. He had a copy of the wire transfer from our joint account to the company's account, and then from that account to the seller of the property. The money trail was clear and undeniable. He committed wire fraud when he transferred the money without your consent, Mr. Thompson explained, and he likely forged your signature on bank documents to set up the transfer, which is another serious offense. We have them, Clara. The question is not if we will win, but how we want to proceed. He laid out the options. We could go the civil route, suing for the return of the money, plus damages. Or we could report the fraud to the authorities, which could lead to criminal charges. I don't want to send him to jail, I said, thinking of my child. But I want him to understand the gravity of what he did. I want them both to feel the consequences. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. I understand. A public confrontation might be the most effective approach. We can use the threat of criminal charges as leverage to ensure a swift and complete return of your assets. We will make them an offer they cannot refuse. We decided to wait for the perfect moment. Mark and Brenda, in their arrogance, provided it for us. They decided to host a pre-launch party at the new store. They invited all their friends and family to show off their new venture. It was meant to be their moment of triumph, a celebration of their success. It would be their moment of reckoning instead. The invitation arrived in a glossy, expensive envelope. Mark and Brenda cordially invite you to celebrate the future opening of Brenda's Best Boutique. My name was not even on the invitation. I was not a partner. I was not even a guest. I was an afterthought. That was the final insult. I looked at the invitation, a slow smile spreading across my face. They had just handed me the perfect stage for their public humiliation. I called Mr. Thompson. The party is on Saturday, I said. Be ready. I will be there, Clara, he replied, and I will bring all the necessary paperwork. It's time to bring the curtain down on their little show. The days leading up to the party were tense. Mark was giddy with excitement, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. He talked endlessly about the store, about his plans, about how this was just the beginning. I listened, nodded, and smiled, my heart a block of ice in my chest. On the day of the party, I took my time getting ready. I chose a simple, elegant dress, one that made me feel strong and confident. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was not the naive, trusting girl who had married Mark. She was a mother, a fighter, a survivor, and she was ready for war. When I arrived at the boutique, the party was in full swing. The store was beautifully decorated, filled with racks of expensive baby clothes and displays of high-end toys. Brenda and Mark were at the center of it all, greeting guests, accepting congratulations, their faces flushed with pride. Brenda was wearing a ridiculously flamboyant hat, acting as if she were the queen of a small kingdom. Mark saw me, and his face broke into a wide smile. He came over and put his arm around me. There you are, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Everyone, this is my wonderful wife, Clara. None of this would be possible without her support. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I smiled sweetly at him. It's a beautiful store, Mark. You and your mother have done an amazing job. He beamed, completely unaware of the double meaning in my words. I scanned the crowd, looking for Mr. Thompson. He had told me he would arrive exactly 1 hour into the party, giving them plenty of time to bask in their false glory. I made small talk with some of the guests, accepting their congratulations on the baby and their compliments on the store. Every word felt like a lie, but I kept my composure. I was an actress in the final scene of a play, and I was determined to give the performance of a lifetime. Finally, I saw him. Mr. Thompson walked in, a distinguished figure in a dark suit, carrying a leather briefcase. He looked completely out of place in the celebratory atmosphere, and his arrival caused a ripple of curiosity to spread through the crowd. He walked directly towards me. "Clara," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "I am." We walked together towards the center of the room, where Mark and Brenda were holding court. Mark's smile faltered when he saw us approaching. "Clara, who is this?" he asked, a note of confusion in his voice. Brenda looked Mr. Thompson up and down with a disdainful expression. "This is a private party," she said haughtily. "I believe you have the wrong address." "Oh, I believe I'm in exactly the right place," Mr. Thompson replied, his voice cutting through the party chatter. The room started to fall silent as people turned to watch the unfolding drama. "My name is Arthur Thompson. I am Clara's legal counsel." Mark's face went pale. "A lawyer? What is this, Clara? Are you trying to ruin our big night?" he hissed, his voice low and angry. I stepped forward, my voice clear and steady, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your big night?" I said. "That's funny. I thought this was my big night. After all, I paid for everything." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Brenda's face turned a blotchy red. "What nonsense is this?" she sputtered. "Mark built this business with his own hard work." "Really?" I said, turning to face the guests. "Did he work hard when he drained our joint savings account of the inheritance my grandmother left me? Did he work hard when he forged my signature to wire that money to a shell company named after his mother? Did he work hard when he used my money, the money meant for his own child's future, to buy this building and everything in it?" The silence in the room was absolute. Everyone was staring at Mark and Brenda, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Mark looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. But I felt nothing. No pity. No remorse. Just a cold, satisfying sense of justice. He had made his choice. Now he had to live with the consequences. Brenda, however, was not one to go down without a fight. She puffed up her chest, her face a mask of indignation. "How dare you!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You ungrateful little girl! Mark did this for your family, for your future. That money became his the day he married you." Mark seemed to find his voice, clinging to his mother's delusional argument. "She's right, Clara," he said, his voice gaining a desperate strength. "We are married. What's yours is mine. The money is mine now." He said the words again, the same words that had started this whole nightmare. But this time, they had no power over me. I just looked at him, a small, sad smile on my face. This is who he was. This was the man I had married. The illusion was completely shattered. The room was tense, all eyes on us. It was the moment we had been waiting for. I looked at Mr. Thompson. He gave me a slight nod. He stepped forward, placing his briefcase on a nearby table. He opened it and took out a single file. He looked directly at Mark, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. He said one word, a word that was simple, clear, and legally irrefutable, a word that would bring their entire world crashing down. "Inheritance," Mr. Thompson said. The word hung in the air, simple and devastating. It cut through all of Mark's blustering and Brenda's screeching. It was a single, solid fact in a room full of lies. Mark just stared at him, his mouth slightly agape. "What?" he stammered, his bravado completely gone. What does that mean?" Mr. Thompson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was calm, factual, and utterly damning. "It means, mister," he began, addressing Mark directly, "that the funds you removed from the joint account were from a designated inheritance. Under the laws of this state, an inheritance is considered separate property, not marital property. It belongs solely to the person who inherited it. In this case, it belongs to Clara." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The guests were murmuring now, their faces a mix of pity for me and disgust for Mark. Brenda looked like she was about to faint. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. That can't be right, Mark insisted, his voice cracking. We put it in a joint account. That makes it ours. Placing it in a joint account for convenience does not automatically convert separate property into marital property, especially when the source is so clearly documented, and there was no written agreement to transmute it, Mr. Thompson continued, his voice like a judge delivering a verdict. He opened the file and laid a document on the table. This is a copy of your grandmother's will, Clara, clearly stating the funds are bequeathed solely to you. And this, he said, placing another paper next to it, is the bank statement showing the direct deposit of those funds from the estate's account into yours. He then turned his attention back to Mark. When you move that money without Clara's knowledge or consent, you were not investing marital assets. You were taking her separate property. That has a legal term, mister. It's called theft by conversion. Brenda finally found her voice again, though it was shrill and panicked. This is a family matter. You have no right to interfere. Mr. Thompson gave her a withering look. It became a legal matter the moment your son committed fraud. He pulled out another document from his briefcase. This is the wire transfer confirmation. You moved the funds from the joint account to a new corporate account for a shell company, Brenda's Best LLC, a company of which you are the sole director. You then used those funds to purchase this property. He looked around the beautifully decorated store. All of this, he said with a sweep of his hand, was purchased with stolen money. The word stolen hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Mark flinched, as if he had been physically struck. I didn't steal it, he protested weakly. It was for us. For our future. Was it for your future when you named the company after your mother and not your wife? Mr. Thompson countered. Was it for your future when you failed to put Clara's name on the property deed? Was it for your future when you lied to her about where the money went? He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on Mark. The bank has confirmed that setting up that wire transfer required 2 signatures. As it was over the account's threshold, Clara certainly didn't sign it. That leaves us with forgery, another serious criminal offense. The room was completely silent now. The party was over. The celebration had turned into a public trial. Mark looked from me to his mother, then to the shocked faces of his friends and family. There was no escape. He was trapped. So what do you want? He finally whispered, his voice hoarse. Do you want to send me to prison? I stepped forward. It was my turn to speak. No, Mark, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I don't want to see the father of my child in jail. But I will not be a victim. I will not let you or your mother destroy the future my grandmother gave me. Mr. Thompson took his cue. Here is our offer, he said, his voice crisp and businesslike. You have 2 options. Option 1, Clara reports the wire fraud and forgery to the district attorney. The evidence is overwhelming. You will be prosecuted and you will almost certainly be convicted. You will have a criminal record and you will go to prison. He let that sink in for a moment. Mark's face was ashen. Brenda was clutching her chest, looking like she was having trouble breathing. Option 2, Mr. Thompson continued, is that you unwind this entire transaction immediately. You will sign over the deed to this property to Clara. You will liquidate any remaining funds in the Brenda's Best account and return them to Clara. You will also sign a document, which I have right here, confessing to the misappropriation of funds and agreeing to a divorce settlement in which you waive any and all claims to any of Clara's assets, present and future. In return, Clara will agree not to press criminal charges. He placed a pen and a set of documents on the table. The choice is yours. You can lose your pride, or you can lose your freedom. You have 5 minutes to decide. He then turned to the stunned guests. I believe this party is over. I suggest you all leave. No one needed to be told twice. The room cleared out in a matter of seconds. People avoiding eye contact with Mark and Brenda as they scurried out the door. Soon it was just the 4 of us left in the silent, half-empty store, surrounded by the ruins of their ambition. Mark stared at the papers, then at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and despair. Brenda was sobbing quietly in a corner. The clock was ticking. Their perfect little world had come to an end, and a new one, my own, was just beginning. Mark stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, his gaze fixed on the documents Mr. Thompson had laid out. The silence in the store was heavy, broken only by Brenda's pathetic whimpering. He looked up at me, his face a mess of confusion and rage. "You planned this," he said, his voice a low growl. "You planned this whole thing to humiliate me." "You humiliated yourself, Mark," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "You did this. You and your mother. You lied to me. You stole from me, and you were going to cut me out of my own life. This isn't humiliation. This is a consequence." He looked at Brenda, as if expecting her to save him, but she just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "He was doing it for us, Clara," she mumbled through her sobs. "For the family." "My family includes my unborn child, Brenda," I shot back. "And you were both perfectly happy to steal from that child to fund this monument to your greed." Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, a gentle reminder of the ticking clock. "2 minutes, mister," he said calmly. Mark looked back at the papers. He knew he was beaten. The evidence was irrefutable. His friends and family had witnessed his disgrace. There was no way to talk his way out of this. He had only one path that didn't lead directly to a jail cell. With a shaking hand, he picked up the pen. He didn't read the documents. He just signed where Mr. Thompson indicated. He signed the confession. He signed the property transfer deed. He signed the divorce settlement agreement. With each stroke of the pen, he was signing away his pride, his lies, and his control over me. When he was finished, he threw the pen down on the table. It clattered loudly in the silent room. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at his signature, the final proof of his defeat. "Is that all?" he asked, his voice bitter. "For now," Mr. Thompson said, gathering the signed documents and placing them carefully back in his briefcase. "We will have the property deed officially recorded tomorrow morning. A courier will deliver the rest of your personal belongings from the house. I suggest you find somewhere else to stay." Mark finally looked at me, his eyes burning with a cold fury. "You'll regret this, Clara," he snarled. I met his gaze without flinching. "No, Mark," I said softly. "I won't. The only thing I regret is not seeing who you really were sooner." He turned and walked towards the door, not even glancing at his mother. Brenda scrambled to her feet and hurried after him. "Mark, wait, where are you going?" she cried. He ignored her and stormed out into the night. Brenda stood in the doorway for a moment, looking lost and broken, before scurrying out after him. And then they were gone. I was alone in the store. My store. I walked slowly through the aisles, running my hand over the soft fabrics of the tiny clothes. This was all mine now, bought and paid for with my grandmother's love and my own strength. I didn't feel triumph, not yet. I just felt a profound sense of exhaustion and relief. The fight was over. I had won. Mr. Thompson came and stood beside me. "Are you all right, Clara?" he asked gently. I nodded, a single tear rolling down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of release. "I will be," I said. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for everything." "Your grandmother would be very proud of you," he said with a warm smile. "You are stronger than you think." He was right. I had faced the worst betrayal of my life, and I had not broken. I had fought back, and I had reclaimed my future. The road ahead would be difficult. I would be a single mother. I would have to rebuild my life from the ground up. But I would be free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, and the suffocating control of Mark and his mother. I looked around the store, a new idea beginning to form in my mind. Maybe I wouldn't sell it. Maybe this could be my new beginning, a business of my own, built on a foundation of truth and independence. A legacy for my child, born not of theft, but of resilience. I took a deep breath, the air smelling of new paint and new possibilities. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was mine. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of legal and personal activity. Mr. Thompson was as good as his word. The property deed was officially transferred into my name the very next day. The remaining funds from the Brenda's Best account, a pitifully small amount after their spending spree on renovations, were wired back to a new, secure account that I had opened in my name only. Mark, true to his cowardly nature, disappeared. He didn't call. He didn't text. He simply vanished. I later found out from a mutual acquaintance that he was staying with Brenda, licking his wounds and likely plotting his next move, but I didn't care. He was no longer my problem. A moving company, arranged and paid for by Mr. Thompson out of the settlement, arrived and packed up all of Mark's belongings. It was a strange, cleansing experience to watch his things being carried out of the house. Each box that left felt like a weight being lifted from my shoulders. The house felt lighter, brighter, and finally, truly mine. My friend Sarah was my rock during this time. She came over the day after the party, a container of my favorite soup in one hand and a box of tissues in the other. I recounted the entire story of the confrontation, and she listened with a mixture of horror and awe. "You are my hero," she said when I finished. "Seriously, Clara, what you did took so much courage. To stand up to him and his horrible mother in front of everyone. That's legendary." Her support meant the world to me. It reminded me that while I had lost a husband and a mother-in-law, I was not alone. I had true friends who had my back. We spent the afternoon talking, not about Mark, but about the future, about the baby, about the store. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Are you really going to run a baby boutique?" I smiled. "I think so," I said. "It feels right. Like turning something ugly into something beautiful. I'm going to rename it, of course." Brenda's Best is not exactly the vibe I'm going for. We spent the next hour brainstorming new names, laughing and dreaming. It was the first time I had felt genuinely happy in months. Of course, not everyone was as supportive as Sarah. A few days later, I received a phone call from Mark's aunt, a woman who had always been Brenda's closest confidant. Her tone was cold and accusatory. "Clara, I cannot believe what I'm hearing," she began, without even a hello. "How could you do that to your husband? To his mother? You humiliated them." I took a deep breath, refusing to let her get to me. "What I did," I said calmly, "was protect myself and my child from a man who stole my inheritance and a woman who encouraged him to do it. What they did was illegal and immoral." "I'm surprised that's not what you're focused on." "It was a misunderstanding," she insisted. "A business deal. You've ruined Mark's life over a little money." "A little money," I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. "It was my entire inheritance. It was my child's security. And he didn't just misunderstand. He lied, he forged documents, and he planned to cut me out completely. I have a signed confession, if you'd like to see it." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. She clearly hadn't heard that part of the story. "A confession?" she stammered. "Yes," I said. "He signed it to avoid going to prison. So, you can call me whatever names you want. You can think I'm the villain of this story. But I have the truth on my side. And I have the law. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm very busy building a life for myself. A life that no longer includes people who think theft is just a misunderstanding. Please don't call me again." I hung up, my hand trembling slightly, but my heart filled with a sense of righteous empowerment. I was done letting his family bully me. I was done being silent. The divorce proceedings were swift and uncomplicated, thanks to the settlement agreement Mark had signed. He didn't contest anything. He didn't fight for a single asset. He just wanted it to be over. We never saw each other in court. Everything was handled through our lawyers. The day the divorce was finalized, I didn't celebrate. I just felt a quiet sense of closure. A chapter of my life was over. It was a painful chapter, but it had taught me some valuable lessons. It had taught me about my own strength. It had taught me to trust my instincts. And it had taught me that I was capable of standing on my own 2 feet. A week later, I was at the store, now officially renamed the Eleanor after my grandmother. I was meeting with a contractor to discuss some changes I wanted to make to erase the last traces of Brenda's gaudy taste. As I was standing there, looking at the empty shelves, the front door opened. It was Mark. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked older, defeated. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharp. This was my space. He was not welcome here. I wanted to talk," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "There's nothing to talk about, Mark. The lawyers have handled everything." "I know," he said, taking a hesitant step forward. I'm sorry, Clara. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. My mom, she gets in my head. She pushed me, and I was stupid, and... "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "Just stop. Don't you dare try to blame this on your mother. You are a grown man. You made your own choices. You chose to lie to me. You chose to steal from me. You chose to stand there in front of all those people and tell me my money was yours. That was all you, Mark. Own it." He flinched, but he didn't argue. He just nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "You're right," he whispered. "I messed up. I lost everything. I lost you." The words were meant to make me feel guilty, but they didn't. I felt nothing for him anymore. The love I once had was gone, replaced by a cold, hard scar. "Yes, you did," I said simply. "Now, if you don't mind, I have a business to run and a baby to prepare for. I have a future to build, and you're not in it." He looked up at me one last time, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic plea for something I could no longer give him. Forgiveness. Absolution. A second chance. He found none of it in my face. I just stared back at him, my expression calm and unyielding. He finally seemed to understand. He turned and walked out of the store, out of my life, for the last time. As the door closed behind him, I placed a hand on my growing belly. "It's just us now, little one," I whispered, "and we're going to be just fine." I looked around my store, my beautiful store, named for a strong woman who had given me the means to save myself, and I smiled. The best was yet to come.